Recognize the member from Regina Wall-Chakers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I'm proud to stand up and take part in the debate on fracking. I'm not too sure what my honourable colleague from Athabasca talked about for 10 minutes, but I'm going to talk about fracking and the role it plays in our economy and how the oil and gas industry plays a large role in our economy. I don't think this is a silly motion, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I think it's an important role. It plays a huge role in our economy. 34,000 people are employed in our province today because of the oil and gas industry, Mr. Speaker. So I think to belittle a motion that talks about that industry and say it's a silly motion is not proper, is not right. And I think the people that belong to CAP, I'm not sure they'd appreciate the Athabasca MLA insinuating that he knows what CAP's thinking. I've have a few meetings with CAP, and I haven't seen him at very many of them, and I've talked to a few of their association members, and I'm not sure he'd be quoting them correctly. Mr. Speaker, before I get into the meat of my story, I just want to talk about fracking for a bit. And I know there's a lot of misconceptions out there about what exactly hydraulic fracturing is, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, it's a type of fracture treatment that will use low concentrations between 3 and 12 additive chemicals. It's not a huge chemical process, Mr. Deputy Speaker. There's about 99.3% of the solution used in fracking is water and sand, Mr. Speaker. And they have to use this for a few reasons, Mr. Speaker, and a few things that they add, Deputy Speaker, and a few things that they add. The additives are called friction reducers. These friction reducers allows fracturing fluids and sands or other materials called proponents to be pumped to the target zones at a higher rate and reduced pressure than if it was water alone were used. In addition to friction reducers, there's a few other additives, some biocides to prevent microorganism growth and to reduce biofouling. Mr. Speaker, hydraulic fracturing is used, as my colleagues have said, is used to open up, pumped into rocks, to open up holes so that the oil can be recovered through those holes. And the sand is used to keep those holes open so that it is allowed to flow through and the oil can be produced in the well. Mr. Speaker, it's an interesting environmental conversation we have when we have a former environmental minister across the way talking about fracturing, and it's been going on for 50 years. And he's right, Mr. Speaker. Fracking in Saskatchewan has been going on for 50 years. And actually, he doesn't have to send over the article. I read it as well from our Deputy Minister of the Economy, Mr. Speaker. And he said fracking has been going on in Saskatchewan. It has a 50-year history of safe use and one of the most robust regulatory regimes in place to ensure responsible and sustainable development. I listened to a couple of speeches, the speech from the member from Saskatoon Centre, and he's right. We do agree on some things. We agree on a smart, responsible development, and I think we share those goals. And I think the most important thing is to have a plan with smart, sensible, sustainable development. And on this side, we do have a plan, Mr. Speaker. We have a plan on environmental targets. We have a plan on some smart development to ensure that the oil and gas industry can continue to grow, can continue to produce jobs, produce economic spin-offs, Mr. Speaker, so that the people of Saskatchewan who own the resources that we're talking about right now, Mr. Speaker, so the people of Saskatchewan can get the full benefit from the resources that we've been blessed with in our province. And Mr. Speaker, Deputy Speaker, when I hear the members from across the way, especially the member from Athabasca, when he gets all wound up and they pull a string and let him go, Mr. Speaker, it's interesting to hear about the Conservatives on this side don't like it, let the NDP create all this economic glory in Saskatchewan. But he misses a couple of things that I think are pretty important, Mr. Deputy Speaker. One would be that we lived in Saskatchewan under the NDP reign of 16 years, Mr. Speaker, and I think our memories are okay. I don't remember birds singing and halos and angels singing on high for 16 years, Mr. Speaker. I do remember every one of my friends graduating from high school in Swift Current leaving the province in 2000, which I think would be under their reign, Mr. Speaker. And I remember our population declined in 99, 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006. I think that was probably at our lowest population in a few decades, Mr. Speaker. And I think people do still vote with their feet, and if people keep leaving their province, yet on one history from the member from Athabasca, it's the greatest time in Saskatchewan's history, Athabasca, thank you. it's the greatest time in Saskatchewan's history. Why would all of our young people continue to leave? Which would beg the question they should maybe ask themselves sometime when they're looking in the mirror. We are great. We formed this province. We were able to make a solid foundation. The economy was strong. Everyone was loving it, but people were still leaving, which should be a question they should probably ask themselves every now and then. And I think, I'm not sure, but eventually they're going to have to go through a policy review. I know the leader doesn't want to release his election platform today or tomorrow, which I totally understand, but at some point in time, they will have to put some policies on their website. And I think some of them should be around their environmental record, that they actually do have a record, Mr. Speaker. And there is a couple former environment ministers over there, and I think the environment critics should have a conversation with them, because they always talk about our environmental record and what our environmental policies, but they had some of their own which were interesting. And one was, over their 16 years, greenhouse gas emissions increased nearly 70%. So that's not good, Mr. Speaker. No, I said nearly 70%. So they have their member from Athabasca come over the board and talk about our environmental record, yet their record isn't very good, Mr. Speaker, and I think he may have even been the minister back then when they had such a horrendous environmental record when it comes in regards to greenhouse gas emissions. Mr. Speaker, obviously when we come and talk about hydraulic fracturing in the oil and gas sector, there's some things we like to mention around the environment. And Mr. Speaker, one is we're proud of our environmental record. We're going forward with the carbon capture and sequestration that they put on hold when they were last couple of years of their government, Mr. Speaker. And another thing they talk about is their green strategy and their Go Green initiative or whatever they called it. They set up this whole initiative and strategy and didn't fund it. There was no funding there. They had, as the members, they had a lot of announcements, and I know how they like to say we had flashy brochures with all of our announcements, but they didn't even have a flashy brochure because they didn't fund anything, so they couldn't, Mr. Speaker. So when they start talking about our environmental record, it's always interesting that before you talk about someone else's record, you should be sure you have a leg to stand on when you're talking, because with their record, Mr. Speaker, I think if you take it to the people of Saskatchewan and say, you know, do you want to look at what we've done or what the NDP say they're going to do? Because I think sometimes when they say they're going to do something, they have a history of really not following through, Mr. Speaker. And that's one of the things that people enjoy about our government. And when we go door knocking in the constituencies and say, you know, these are some of our plans we have going forward, and a policy plan, which people like to see, a plan moving forward, Mr. Speaker, like a plan for growth. I think they say, hey, well, they have a plan, and they're going to tell us some of the things they're going to do. And I think we can believe them, Mr. Speaker, because they've done what they said they're going to do. And I really do think that sometimes when you get to go door knocking, and every now and then people bring up some of the opposition's critiques, and which is fair, because I enjoy talking with all constituents across Saskatchewan, not only in Regina, but all over the place, Mr. Speaker. And they say, well, you guys have a plan for some of your critiques. And I said, well, that's what governments do, Mr. Speaker. You get a plan in place and say, this is what we're going to do if we have the privilege to govern again. And so I said, well, we do have a plan in place, and you know we're not perfect, and there is more work to do, Mr. Deputy Speaker. But on that same note, I'd say, and I think it's fair, you say, well, obviously some of the people that critique us may support the NDP. I think that's a fair assessment from across the way. I said, well, what are your guys' plans? When you get going into a policy debate, Mr. Speaker, it's very hard to debate policy with an opponent that has no policies. So, Mr. Speaker, when you go back and forth and you're trying to have a lively debate about things like fracking, like hydraulic fracking, have a debate about fracking, have a debate about the environment, which this involves, environmental debate, Mr. Speaker, obviously. If you're going to have those debates, Deputy Speaker, how do you do that when there's nothing on the other side? And then when you try and debate the other side, and you talk about their record when they were in government for 16 years, and say, well, you had the Go Green initiative or the green strategy, but no money. Your greenhouse gas emissions went up nearly 70% when you're in government. Well, no, you can't talk about that because they're going to do better. Well, if you're going to do better, you have to have goals and targets. which they don't like to set either, as we know that, because sometimes if you set a goal, if you don't make it, it's kind of a tough sell, Mr. Speaker. But I think sometimes when we get involved in these good policy debates, Deputy Speaker, I think it's very hard to be in a policy debate if the other side doesn't have a plan.
Yeah.